The young waitress had never felt so small, so invisible, and so humiliated in her entire life. That morning, she had stepped into the luxury car dealership with a nervous excitement, her heart racing as she walked past the gleaming rows of brand-new vehicles, each one sparkling under the showroom lights like a jewel. She had been invited by a friend who was casually looking for a car, and she had wanted to be supportive, to offer an opinion or two. But as soon as she crossed the polished threshold, she realized that this place was built on arrogance as much as it was on luxury. The salesman, impeccably dressed and polished to perfection, moved with a practiced air of superiority, their eyes scanning her from head to toe, clearly noting her simple uniform and worn shoes. There was a sharpness in their gaze, a subtle mockery that made her feel like an intruder in a world that was never meant for someone like her. She tried to steady her breathing, to tell herself that it didn't matter, that she was just here to help a friend and had no obligation to impress anyone. But the moment she approached a salesman with a polite question about one of the cars, the reaction was immediate and cruel. He glanced at her uniform, then at her anxious hands, and a smirk slowly crept across his face. "Are you sure you're in the right place, miss?" he asked, his tone dripping with condescension. His colleagues nearby chuckled softly at the comment, pretending to be casual, but the laughter was anything but harmless. It was sharp, cutting, meant to sting, and it did. She could feel her face flush bright red, as every eye in the immediate vicinity seemed to focus on her, as if she were on display for their amusement. The waitress forced a polite smile and tried to respond, but the words caught in her throat. One of the other salesmen, noticing her hesitation, leaned in and made a low, mocking comment under his breath about how she probably didn't belong in a place where cars cost more than most people's yearly salaries. The others erupted into quiet laughter, trying to hide it but failing miserably. She could feel the weight of their judgment pressing down on her chest like a physical force, and she wanted nothing more than to disappear, to shrink into herself and vanish from the showroom entirely. Every step she took toward the exit felt heavier than the last, as though the polished floor beneath her feet had transformed into quicksand, holding her down with the burden of their ridicule. She felt exposed, raw, and powerless, a feeling that she hated more than anything else in the world. Her mind raced with a mixture of embarrassment and anger, a cocktail of emotions she could barely process. Why did it hurt so much? She had worked hard to make a living, juggling endless shifts, serving people who sometimes treated her like she didn't exist, and she had never let it define her self-worth. But here, in this pristine, luxurious environment, her identity as a waitress seemed like a scarlet letter, a mark that they could point to and laugh at. She kept telling herself that it didn't matter, that these people were small-minded and superficial. But their words had lodged themselves deep in her mind, echoing relentlessly. Each laugh, each sneer replayed in her head, making her question herself in a way she rarely allowed. For a long moment, she simply stood frozen, unsure whether to flee or confront them, her pride wrestling with her humiliation. She finally made the choice that felt safest. She turned on her heel and walked toward the door, trying to hold back tears that threatened to spill. Her cheeks burned with shame and indignation, and the sting of their arrogance followed her like a shadow. As she stepped outside, the cold air hit her face, and she drew in a deep breath, trying to gather herself. She told herself that this was not the end, that she would never allow anyone to make her feel this small again. The anger that simmered beneath her initial embarrassment began to harden into determination. She vowed silently, firmly, that someday she would return, but not as the timid, self-conscious waitress they had mocked. She would return as someone they could not ignore, someone they could not ridicule, someone who would stand taller than anyone in that showroom and command respect simply by existing in it. With each step away from the dealership, her resolve grew stronger. She replayed every detail of the humiliation in her mind, not as a source of shame, but as fuel. She began imagining herself in a future where their sneers and laughter would mean nothing, where she would hold the power and they would have none. It was a vision that kept her heart pounding with anticipation, a secret hope that promised justice in a way no confrontation ever could. That day she walked away with her head high, but inside, a spark had been lit, one that would one day blaze into a force too strong for anyone to ignore, a promise to herself that she would rise above, and she would make them regret ever underestimating her. By the next morning, the world had shifted entirely under her feet, though not in the way anyone expected. She returned to the very same luxury car dealership, but this time every step she took resonated with a power and confidence that made the polished floorboards seem to recognize her presence. Gone was the timid waitress who had shuffled nervously through the showroom hours ago. In her place stood a woman who had clawed her way into a position of unimaginable success, her very posture exuding authority. She moved with the grace of someone completely in control of her destiny, each step deliberate, each movement calculated to convey not arrogance, but undeniable presence. Her designer suit fit impeccably, tailored to perfection, and the subtle shine of her accessories whispered sophistication without screaming wealth. The air seemed to shift around her as she entered, and heads began to turn. Conversations halted mid-sentence. Phones paused mid-call. Even the showroom lights seemed to glint a little brighter off the curves of the vehicles, as if acknowledging her arrival. The salesmen who had humiliated her yesterday froze the moment they saw her. Their laughter and mocking smirks had vanished, replaced by uncertainty, disbelief, and a flicker of fear. They blinked rapidly, trying to reconcile the timid, nervous waitress who had been their source of amusement with this radiant, commanding figure who now walked effortlessly between the gleaming rows of luxury cars. Their mouths opened, yet no words came, and the polite, practiced smiles that normally masked their superiority faltered under the weight of her presence. She allowed herself a small, knowing smile, the kind that spoke volumes without saying a single word. It was a quiet, almost imperceptible acknowledgement of the irony of the situation. Yesterday, they had treated her as though she were nothing. Today, she was everything they could only aspire to be. Her eyes scanned the showroom, fixing on the very group of men who had made her feel so small, so powerless, and for a brief moment, a flicker of satisfaction passed through her. There was no need for confrontation, no need for revenge in words or actions. The truth of her transformation spoke louder than any insult could. She approached them with calm, deliberate steps, and as she did, she felt the unspoken panic ripple through their ranks. She extended her hand with grace, offering a polite, professional greeting that contrasted sharply with the mockery of the day before. "Good morning," she said, her voice clear, confident, and smooth, carrying the weight of authority. The simple words seemed to hang in the air like a challenge, and the men hesitated before shaking her hand, their movements stiff and awkward. They were suddenly acutely aware of their own inadequacies, their previous arrogance now a source of silent shame. Then came the most satisfying moment. She began to discuss a potential purchase, a multi-million-dollar deal that was both swift and precise, leaving the salesman scrambling to adjust to her expertise. Every question she asked, every comment she made was deliberate, revealing not only her wealth, but also her intelligence and strategic acumen. The very people who had sneered at her the day before were now hanging on her every word, eager to please, desperate to gain her approval. It was almost theatrical. The power dynamics had flipped completely, and she was fully in command of the stage. Their previous laughter had been replaced by nervous nods, quick smiles, and the occasional stammered response, all of it underscoring how thoroughly the tables had turned. The woman they had underestimated had become a force they could neither ignore nor control. As she finalized the deal, the air seemed to crackle with tension and awe. Other customers in the showroom paused to watch, sensing that something remarkable was happening, though few could put it into words. She moved with a quiet, irresistible authority, guiding the process with elegance and precision, making decisions that were both shrewd and decisive. The salesman, who had hours earlier treated her as invisible, now treated her as a VIP, their every movement calculated to impress, to anticipate her needs, and to secure her favor. Their earlier mockery seemed almost childish now, a distant memory of a moment they would never live down. And in that moment, She felt an overwhelming sense of vindication, not from cruelty or revenge, but from simply existing in her full power, from allowing her success, confidence, and intellect to speak louder than any insult could have. As the final paperwork was signed, she allowed herself a final to ignore the truth staring them in the face. It was as if the universe itself had conspired to teach them a lesson about arrogance and underestimation. She walked out of the dealership with her